All right. Good morning. Good morning, everyone. My name is Sam Priestley. I'm the Vice President of Communications for the United States Association for Energy Economics. It gives me great pleasure to welcome you to today's webinar, EIA's role in supporting the nation's energy dialogue, given by Angelina LaRose. She is the Deputy Administrator of the United States Association for Energy, U.S. Energy Information Administration. She was appointed to this role in November of last year, where she provides strategic leadership and direction to ensure EIA remains the nation's premier source of independent, impartial energy information. She oversees a broad spectrum of statistical, analytical, and dissemination activities and serves as EIA's primary spokesperson, representing the agency in key government and industry forums. Uh, Ms. LaRose brings decades of experience to her role, having previously served as EIA's Assistant Administrator for Energy Analysis from 2019 to 2025. In that capacity, she directed EIA's energy modeling program and managed topical analysis across a broad range of fields and activities. From 2016 to 2019, she was director of the Office of Integrated and International Energy Analysis, where she led the integration of analysis and modeling for EIA's long-term domestic and international projections, as well as short-term forecasts and country-level energy statistics. Lastly, we would like to thank USAEE sponsors for making this event possible, in particular, the Center for Energy Studies at LSU, who provided the infrastructure for this event. The center will be hosting Energy Fundamentals 2026, a week-long course offering a comprehensive overview of the U.S. energy sector with special emphasis on Louisiana and the Gulf Coast, covering the history, science, and economics of energy production and consumption. Registration is currently open, and this event will take place later this summer in June and July. If you're interested in becoming a sponsor, you can reach out to USAEE. Our webinar is structured as follows. There will be a 20-minute presentation by Ms. LaRose, then 15 minutes of discussion between Ms. LaRose and Dr. Hittinger, followed by 10 minutes of Q&A from our audience. Please enter in your questions into the chat, and we'll be able to answer them. You're welcome to ask questions during the presentation and discussions, and we may answer them as well too. Thank you. Eric?
Yeah, so I guess my only note to start is if you have questions, put them into the Q&A. I think we'll hold those questions until the end, but please do put them in as they come up, and I will mix them in with my questions. And the more questions we get from the audience, the less you have to hear from my perspective. But of course, our featured speaker today is Angelina LaRose, the Associate Administrator for Deputy Administrator for EIA, and she's going to tell us a little bit about some of the details of what EIA does. And then this audience, we get to kind of grill her on our specific perspectives or angles or ideas relating to that. So Angelina, please take it away.
Great. I am going to attempt to share my presentation. Does that look good?
I don't see it yet.
Okay.
Something's coming. So we see the PowerPoint, but it's not yet in full screen mode.
Right.
There we go. Now. Beautiful.
Okay, great. Thank you. I get my mouse set up. Thank you, everyone. Good morning. It is a pleasure to be here today. I particularly love engaging with groups that are a sophisticated audience, which I know all of you are, and you have a deep understanding of the energy space. So I'm looking forward to the dialogue after my presentation. So what I'm going to do today is give a 20-minute overview on EIA. Again, I'm sure and I hope most of you use our information and products in your day-to-day daily work. but I'm going to try to share the how, what, and why of what we do. And hopefully you'll learn something, a new facet of about EIA that you hadn't considered before. So as my bio suggested, I've spent most of my career in service to the American public in working with EIA. I started fresh out of college. I worked on one of our petroleum surveys. It was back in the olden days where people would mail us their forms that they would hand fill out, and I worked in quality assurance on a survey that dealt with retail gasoline prices. I learned a lot about the work that we do here. I learned a lot about how we engage our respondents. I learned a lot about different parts of the country and how they view federal government. And I just it was a really great learning opportunity and entree into the work that EIA does. I left after a few years and I worked at a private consulting firm. And I came back to EIA following that. The consulting firm I worked with had an energy lilt by nature. So while I was there, I was a stakeholder of EIA, which made me really grew my conviction of the importance of EIA's mission in providing this impartial and independent data and analysis, as I was a stakeholder at the time using it. When I returned to EIA, as you just heard, I worked largely in the analytics side of the shop, but I do feel like my overall time at EIA, I've had a lot of view into both our analysis as well as our statistical side of things. So as I mentioned, what drew me back to EIA was our mission. So what exactly is that mission? So EIA's mission is to collect, process, analyze, and publish energy data for the American people. This mission is statutorily based, and the work that we're to support this mission is statutorily based. In terms of EIA's origin story, we were created in the response to the need for additional federal initiatives to collect and disseminate energy-related information and to evaluate and analyze that information during the 1970s, during the oil crisis and energy crisis around that time. The first law to address these needs was the Federal Energy Administration Act of 1974. The Federal Energy Administration, or FEA, is what we consider the predecessor organization to EIA. And over the years, there's been many subsequent laws and that have contributed to EIA's evolution and growth. EIA, as we know it today, was established by the Department of Energy Organization Act of 1977. So what that statute did was set up EIA to provide independent, impartial data and analysis. So EIA is very much a part of the Department of Energy. We're not an independent organization, but our function, or how we function within the Department of Energy, is separate from the administrative, regulatory, and policy-making activities within DOE. But that's not to say that EIA's independent analysis and statistics doesn't provide value to those discussions that are happening in the building as well as across government. As a part of our the founding statute, EIA's data and analysis does not require any approval by any officer or employee of the United States government outside our administrator. We have one political appointee. He's Senate confirmed, and it's at his sole discretion of how we release our publications. They don't need review from the White House, Congress, the Secretary, et cetera. The statute also gives EIA authority to compel the energy industry to submit data to us. This statutory authority is particularly important. Often we engage or hear from other groups or countries about how is EIA so successful at what we're doing. There's several different governments have come to us in hopes they're looking for us for inspiration to set up their own version of EIA within their countries. And really the cornerstone of how we're successful is our ability to, our statutory authority to compel people to submit their data to us. We're one of 13 principal federal statistical agencies. Among the other 13 are BLS, Bureau of Labor Statistics, the Bureau of Economic Analysis, There are common characteristics amongst the principal federal statistical agencies. They're to produce objective data that are relevant to policy issues, achieve and maintain credibility among data users, achieve and maintain trust among data providers, so our respondents, and achieve and maintain a strong position of independence from both the appearance and the reality of political influence and control. So EIA's impartiality is vital to the nation's interest. We inform policy making and decision making from a fully independent perspective. One of the sayings that we have around EIA is it's not that the glass is half full, it's not that the glass is half empty, it's the glass could hold 16 ounces of water and there's currently 8 ounces of water within that glass. Our data and analysis provide a common basis for consideration of energy issues both within the department and beyond it. We have a broad spectrum of stakeholders, and you can see that from the customer wheel on the left. This is from one of our web surveys that popped up when people visited EIA.gov. You can see among the two largest slices are business and industry and private citizens. So what we do and what we strive to do is to aim to help folks within the energy industry and the American public. We do this by collecting a lot of information across a full range of energy activities, both from wellhead to burner tip. This range starts before there's any energy activity at all in terms of resources. So we publish information on the reserves of oil, gas, and uranium. We collect information on production of oil, gas, coal, uranium, NGLs, and we track the movement of these raw materials to the downstream process. The middle range is the transformation area. So this is where petroleum products are refined, natural gas are processed, and we collect and publish information on that as well. The electricity sector transforms about 40% of primary energy into power, and we have data and information on that as well. Finally, we collect data about all manner of consumption and the drivers, and we publish information on the drivers of that consumption. So the economic, the demographic, technological, and structural drivers that influence the level of consumption. We have over 65 surveys that cover varying fuels that are released in different time horizons. We recently went through an exercise of how many data series do we produce in a given year? And I likened it to one of the, when you're like, guess how many jelly beans are in this jar type of state fair game. And we counted more than 1 million data series in a given year that EIA publishes. So that's a lot of data, and not included on this slide. I've listed all our data products, but not included is also our hourly electric grid monitor. So with this large volume of data, we are constantly trying to innovate how our stakeholders can find and access the information. So we have data grouped by publication, where we group things like in this Petroleum Supply Monthly or Electricity Market Monthly Update. We have cross-cutting comprehensive products like the Monthly Energy Review. We also have data browsers. People can sort and try to filter through our data to get the information that they need. We have an API that enables users to automatically download and ingest EIA data into their own programs and analyses. The API receives about 1.1 million calls a day and is used by corporate research and policymaking customers. Interestingly, somewhat anecdotally, one of the most visited web pages on EIA's on EIA.gov is our Energy Explained page, which is a plain language encyclopedia of different energy concepts supported by our own data and analysis. This was actually born, as legend has it, from our also wildly popular Energy Kids page. EIA has an Energy Kids page. We have Energy Ant is our official mascot. We had heard feedback from many a PhD student or researcher asking us to please have a more mature source note that they could reference in Energy Kids in their research work. And so hence Energy Explain was born. EIA currently has one principal federal economic indicator, which is a weekly natural gas storage report. As the name suggests, it's a weekly report of natural gas storage levels on a given day on a Friday at 10 o'clock. So what a principal federal economic indicator is a major statistical series that describes the current condition of the economy. So this is something that has been deemed thus. Principal federal economic indicators are compiled, released, and periodically evaluated in accordance to procedures established by the Office of Management and Budget. So this includes things about the schedule, how we treat revisions, and other things like that. Although the WNGSR, the Weekly Natural Gas Storage Report, is our only designated principal federal economic indicator, we also have a weekly petroleum status report, which has statistics on oil and petroleum stocks, imports, and production. That is also a market mover. I included two graphs at the bottom where you could see the price movements upon the release of the WPSR and the WNGSR. Generally, the further from market expectations our data are, the bigger kind of price jump you may see. So we have a unique authority within the Department of Energy to collect data, and we comply with a number of legal obligations to maintain the trust from our respondents, our data suppliers, and ensure the integrity and transparency for data users. EIA's data program is foundational to our mission. So policymakers, energy producers, consumers, investors, traders, and analysts use EIA statistics in their day-to-day activities. Information delivery relies on three pillars. So as I mentioned, and I'll repeat myself because this is critical to us being successful in what we do, we have mandatory collection authority. So our administrator can compel firms to provide information to EIA. But all collections have to be negotiated with the public and with the Office of Management and Budget. So the clearance process that all our survey forms must go through relies on this transparency. And the EIA has to justify its collection authority, why we deem this series important, and why we're going to try to reduce the burden for our respondents. The public is afforded an opportunity to comment on our surveys. That we have to re-clear all our surveys that we currently have, or any new surveys that we're proposing every 3 years. So there is an opportunity for the public to weigh in and make suggestions of how we could alter our survey forms. Because of this mandatory authority we have to collect information is tempered by process limitations, our respondents trust that EIA will handle their information securely, that we are conscious of the cost of the collection, and that what they're providing us will result in useful information that we can report out to the public. This is just a kind of a really high-level snapshot of what this approval process looks like from the Office of Management Budget. It takes about 180 days to go through these steps 2 through 5 in particular, and then even ahead of that, we spend a lot of time preparing information collection requests. We're regularly reviewing our coverage of energy markets, and we revise our data collection efforts to keep pace with evolving energy trends. So that's our statistics side of the house, but our analysis brings context and meaning to this energy data. So we operate both short and long-term energy modeling programs. We have our short-term energy outlook, which is a monthly forecast of largely U.S. Supply, consumption, trade, stocks prices, energy-related CO2 emissions, and the forecast runs through the end of the next calendar year. This is a monthly forecast, so we get to revisit this analysis every month. The next one that we have coming out is next Tuesday, so that should be a pretty interesting STIO for the month, considering it will incorporate some of the recent activities in the Mideast. We also have our annual energy outlook, which projects U.S. Energy supply, consumption, and trade through 2050 and uses the National Energy Modeling System. EIA, within our annual energy outlook, releases a range of cases. So we have a baseline case, reference case that is current laws and regulations and evolutionary technology. And then we have assumptions are included in that case. And then we have a range of side cases that vary key assumptions. So you can see how by varying these key assumptions, the future energy landscape could change. So these are things such as the level of oil and gas supply, oil prices, high and low macroeconomic growth, et cetera. We have a suite of different observational analysis products that we put out. One of our most popular is the Today in Energy series, which we publish multiple times a week, largely Tuesdays through Thursdays. If you're not familiar with that product, I really encourage you to start your work day by going to EIA.gov. Today in Energy is front and center. It offers a real kind of bite-sized analytic piece on a range of different energy issues and activities. And I personally know I always learn a lot by looking at them. Lastly, we do other reports. We have plenty of reports that Congress will make requests of to us. Some of the more recent ones is we have a report that we released on Iranian petroleum. We have we released a subsidies report, federal energy subsidies on energy technologies. And we have a range of other information that we're releasing. Our analysis group at EIA is one of the biggest stakeholders of our data. So this is just kind of a snapshot to show you how we use in our short-term energy outlook a lot of EIA sources. It really is a foundational for our analysis in our outlooks, as well as we have external data sources of things that EIA doesn't collect or forecast, such as the weather or macro market prices, et cetera. And really one of the aims, like when I consider our outlook program in particular, so our short and our long-term outlook, is it provides a complete timeline for many of the series that we produce. So this is just an example from our Annual Energy Outlook 2025. Just as a plug, our Annual Energy Outlook 2026 is going to be released sometime in April. So that's coming out soon. But this graph is from our Annual Energy Outlook 2025. And what you can see here, this is dry gas production. The history line represents data that we've collected from EIA. And then that first 2 years, you can see after that dotted demarcation between history and projection, all the cases share a similar 2-year span. And that's because it's benched to our STIO. So it takes into account our forecast as the jumping off point for our projections. I didn't include, intentionally, I did not include a legend on that graph. But I wanted to include all the lines just so you can see how varying the assumptions really creates a wide band of results. So it's always important. I always put a plug in. If you're somebody that looks at long-term projections, whether it's from our group or EIA, or if it's from some of the other providers of long-term projections, it's really critically important to understand what is going into the cases, what the assumptions are, et cetera, because it really makes a difference. So as I mentioned, we have one political appointee who's Senate confirmed, who's our administrator, and our current administrator is Tristan Abbey. He joined or was sworn in at the end of September. And in his first all-hands meeting with EIA, he said, "We are entering a period of decisive acceleration. We need to move with decisive acceleration." And he is leading that charge. And these are just 4 examples of things that we're doing to accelerate and move us closer to where EIA needs to be. So we're reimagining some of our longstanding products. We're looking at things like analytic time horizons. When looking at, is going out to 2050, does that make the most sense, or should we focus more in terms of the midterm years, do more of a midterm energy outlook? We're considering how we do our international energy analysis. Previously, we've produced an international energy outlook, which is our long-term projections for global markets. We're considering how to more fulsomely wed both our international and our domestic modeling, as well as our outlooks, because that, recognizing that's the reality of the world. The United States, particularly as we become more and more dominant in our energy production and our exports, is very, very integrated into the rest of the world. So how can we reflect that in our model? We're trying to eliminate some redundancy in our products over time. We've just, you can access the same series in many different ways, just through time and website bloat, which happens to a lot of organizations. So we're trying to streamline things just to make it easier for our stakeholders to find the information that they're looking for and make it more efficient for us to maintain. We're looking at IT modernization. We have a lot of technical debt, technology debt with our survey collection and processing software that we're trying to modernize. We're trying to engage AI tools to improve how we do things like coding. We're maintaining our relevance by launching a series of pilot surveys that will help provide us research and insight about what future direction we may want to go. These are things such as pilot surveys on critical minerals, on different areas of consumption. And we're also just really trying to make sure we're being operating as transparently as possible. We're pretty good, I think, or among the best at having transparency in our modeling assumptions. But there's some unevenness that we're trying to address in terms of the documentation that's available for different models, particularly with our short-term outlook, and modeling system. So that is all my remarks. And as I said, I'm looking forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Okay. That was great. Thank you so much for that introduction. And I will once again invite the audience to put in questions into the Q&A box, and I will mix those into my discussion questions for Angelina. But let me start off with one that kind of touches on some of the last few slides that you brought up, and that is about, EIA does both data collection and organization, but also has an analytical side, with both, relatively straightforward analysis as well as rather elaborate modeling efforts like NEMS. And I'm curious how EIA, I don't know, balances or thinks about those two wings of what you do. Does one side drive the other? Are there people that kind of are pushing for more of one versus the other? Is there a tension between them? There's obviously some complementarity
Sure.
between those two efforts, but it's not necessarily obvious that EIA would have to do both of those. But how does that partnership work?
Sure. So I like to think that EIA or analysts and statisticians are pretty collaborative. So they're with how they work with each other. Even by statute, we're meant to collect information, and we're also meant to provide a forecast or a view into the future. Not necessarily defined the way we're defining it by the AEO, but that is a part of our mandate, is to do this analysis and provide policymakers with a view of what the future may look like. I feel that certainly our statistical efforts in are critical. They're the foundation of us doing our analysis. So I mean, without our statistics, we would have a real challenge doing our analysis, because as many of you are aware, it's not that just that EIA may be the authoritative source of information or data. Sometimes we're the only source of information, and even as I understand it, speaking to people when I was earlier in my career who had been at EIA since like the early 80s and were a part of the first model building at EIA. It really was like, hey, for our model, we need this data. And then it was much more kind of because it was like a very nascent type of program, both on our stat side and our analysis side. So there was much more of a, hey, we need this. Okay, I'm going to get it. I think we're a little more mature organization now. That, but OEA will, or the Office of Energy Analysis will provide feedback on during the Federal Register notice process, during, of what information we need or where the emerging trends are. But overall, like I think I view us as one EIA and we're one team, recognizing though kind of our data collection is very important to what we do and is a very important service.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. I suppose the data collection is pretty foundational to what EIA is. But in recent years, in the past recent decades, really, it's hard to imagine an EIA without the analytical capability as well.
Yeah.
Um,
And also like I do like the data collection is foundational to what we do. We wouldn't be able to feed NEMS without the data collection. However, even how our stakeholders engage our modeling program, there are outside groups that use NEMS. There are within their own research. There are people that use our reference case to as the baseline of their own modeling. So even our analysis, it's analysis, it's numbers, and this may be an obvious statement. We produce tables and whatnot. People use those tables as a data input into their own work, so it is still generating this data for people to use and consume.
sure. Okay. So we're starting to get some good questions in here. So I'll mix in, I'm sort of remixing a few questions together, but we've seen more and more changes. I guess the world of energy always changes and is always giving us new things, but it does feel like the past, few decades have introduced some um, new perspectives. I'm thinking specifically of things like hydrofracking and how that's affected oil and gas production in the US, or on the electricity system side, energy storage has kind of an interesting factor. In fact, one of our audience members asked specifically about data on energy storage collection. And then, in just the last few years, we have on the demand side, AI data centers potentially becoming a rather large and important source of new electricity demand. And, I guess the question for you is like, how does EIA sort of assess and respond to these changes in the energy landscape, and potentially in changes to not only what data is collected, but maybe how it's collected, or additional perspectives on or differentiation in the way that it's collected.
Sure. Some of I guess I'm thinking of how to where to start with this. We do have, as new energy technologies emerge, we do adjust and have new surveys. We amend our existing surveys. This is where it is also kind of the relationship between our modeling side and our statistical side will kind of comes together, in the sense that, by how we do things at EIA, we model current laws and regulations. And if we can't model current laws and regulations because we don't have the technology representation or the good data to feed our model to have that technology representation, we need to find that data, and often is through our collection efforts. We are constantly, revisit every 3 years. We revisit what we're collecting on our surveys. As new things come on the modeling side, one of the benefits of our NEMS modeling system is modular. So we can, like I was a part of the rewrite of our natural gas market model, because of all this production that we were seeing all over the country. We didn't have the representation of how gas flows across the country. Right. Like we still had gas flowing, south to north from the Gulf, and all of a sudden we had, the Gulf of America and Pennsylvania, like the size of production. So, when we were able to revisit and change that. But in terms of some of the more kind of newer technologies, I think that's where some of the work that I mentioned that's going on right now with our pilot surveys that we're looking at. We're looking at the impact of critical minerals within the energy supply chain and how that's extremely important. So we have pilot studies about that in terms of like electricity consumption, as you're saying. I mean, we've gone from a period where their electricity grew by 0.1% to is growing to like I think next year in our forecast is about 2.7% growth, which is unbelievable. And so we're looking at like how can we better collect information on consumption. Right now, on that one slide I showed where it had all our different surveys that we have, our consumption surveys are quadrennial every 4 years. And that's if we're like if we're able to maintain that cadence. And is that good enough? Is that good enough to capture the growth of data centers? And how can we, is there something we can do either, and we're exploring things in our pilot survey or in different looking at how we're collecting our consumption data to make sure it remains relevant and we could kind of shrink down the frequency, the length of the extent of the time frequency.
Yeah. I can imagine, right? Especially with AI, it feels like you'd want to update your projections every few months, rather than every few years with that topic. But there's more questions. I'm focusing more on the broader ones, although I know people are asking rather specific questions, and I'm going to try and narrow from broader questions down to more specific questions. But there's a few related questions here about the AEO and integrating kind of what we might call an interesting regulatory landscape today. So specifically, you could take, at the state level, there's certain states like New York and California that have rather ambitious decarbonization goals. But at the same time, right now at the federal level, a lot of the legislation and regulation, is supportive of more coal and oil and natural gas. The question would be, how do you account for these rather different regulatory directions in the modeling, and what effect are they having on the AEO projections? Is there a net effect, or how do you handle that?
Yeah. Yeah, no, and so the annual energy outlook is the all the core cases and the reference case are current laws and regulations. But what we mean by current laws and regulations are things that are implementable policies on the books. We do reflect states that have an implementable policy, enforceable policy on the books within our modeling framework as best as we can. And then there's certainly, one of the things that we've struggled with, not even just during this current administration, even in prior administrations, where there's been goals stated, like we'd like this to happen, but without the policy mechanism fully in place. Typically, how we handle that is looking at we'll run different side cases where we don't ever try to model new policies. But for example, in the last year's AEO, we ran a case that had the current like tailpipe emissions, which was quite stringent greenhouse gas emissions, where we had a lot of EV penetration in our last AEO. But we also then modeled, well, what did it look like before those more stringent, kind of stripping out those more stringent regulations. What impact did that regulation have in showing that? So we try to, I guess we want to be useful, and it seems like, I'll speak frankly, it seems like every time we release AEO, we're on the cusp of a major piece of legislation that's not quite through the finish line yet. But at times in our history, we've opened the box and released a supplementary like reference case for major regulations. But in terms of the tension, I mean, I guess getting back to the heart of the question between federal and state policies, I mean, we just try to do our best to represent what's enforceable and how it plays out in certain, certainly in the electricity sector in terms of construction or regional emission standards and things like that.
Okay. Okay. Great. So, question here about collaborating with agencies in other countries. I can say, so I actually personally do a bunch of research with some French folks, and they're constantly amazed, impressed by the level of data that we have available to us in the US that they don't have in France or the EU, EIA, but also other government agencies within the US. But what kind of level of collaboration does EIA have with similar agencies in other countries, or presumably also the IEA would be an obvious collaborator? And I guess I will add my own additional element to it that I think that EIA doesn't always agree with the IEA assessments of things, and how do you I don't know, not resolve those disputes, but how do you see input from other outside parties as useful or not?
Sure. Yeah, no, so we submit data to IEA just as many other countries. That's where IEA gets their data is from different countries, and we're on the delivery end of that for IEA. And we do though even analytically have a good I'd say relationship with them in terms of they'll brief us on any. They've recently, in the last few years, they had a new model, and they took the time out to meet with us to discuss their new model. And we'll brief them on the AEO. We have a really, really good relationship with them, but we also have an understanding that how, at least in recent history, how they perform their analysis is a lot different than what EIA does. And that's really one of the things I was driving at when I say, if you're looking at long-term outlooks and why are they different, they've adjusted it in the last WEO, their World Energy Outlook, but previously they had really kind of these kind of policy goals embedded within their central case, where EIA is again current laws and regulations, and implemented policy or enforceable policy. But we do, we work with them very collegially. We're both in the same business. I think we both have an acute understanding of what the work that we do. In terms of other countries and organizations, we're also a part of APERC, the Asian Pacific Economic Research Center. They also use our data information. And we participate in international modeling groups and things like that. In recent history, but not so recent history, I want to say maybe 10 years ago, we had a memo of understanding with India as they were trying to stand up their own kind of version of EIA, where we helped them in terms of with sharing some of the knowledge and lessons that we've learned through our history.
Okay. Yeah, interesting. So we actually have two different participants who asked related questions about the projection horizon, time horizon on the AEO, which I guess is currently, I think, 25 years. And, if and when that will be pushed out and projected further into the future.
Sure. I don't know whether I'll be breaking news, but not with this AEO. Spoiler alert. I think I'm not sure. That has not been put on the table. We used to. I mean, it's interesting to me. As somewhat of an EIA historian or somebody that really cares about this organization and likes to understand. It's interesting just going back through some of our older publications and seeing like we're talking about the same flavor of things that we were talking about 30 years ago. We're still trying to wrap our heads around certain concepts. But when our longer term outlook first, what we first did at EIA was more of a 10 to 12 year outlook. And then we kind of would advance that, but we kept it in this 10 to 12 year time frame. And then we just, I think with some of the mid-century kind of targets, we kind of leapt to 2050. So it really did widen the band. But if one of the things that's somewhat interesting with how, or perhaps uninteresting about the projections because of how EIA does is, we have current laws and regulations, and when regulations roll off, they do. So like that last 10 years is really just like almost like just a trend, like it's like there's learning, we still have learning involved or learning rates and different things like that, but it's not, I would say that the insights that you could gain from that last 10 years aren't as interesting as what you're seeing in that first 10-year period. And I think that's why we're examining focusing more on that midterm horizon. Not that we wouldn't produce results out to 2050, but kind of really focusing the discussion on the earlier years. But I guess I will say, like, even that being said, so even if we were going to extend beyond 2050, like I've been to some very interesting modeling forums where groups are going out to 2100. I'm like, and I know I feel like I'm in an interesting business of like saying what gas prices are even going to be next year, like let alone to 2050, and then to go to 2100. I mean, I think we start questioning, what are we adding to the discussion? So
Yeah, that seems fair to me, right? There's definitely a certain leisureliness to projecting out anything to a point after you're going to be dead, right? So at least no one can really give me any trouble about my
yeah,
2100 production because I don't plan to be alive then.
yeah,
Yeah, I see what you mean, but I think a lot of people, right, and myself included, look at the EIA projections as being maybe a sort of vanilla baseline of what the future might look like with business as usual or current policies. So I know myself, I use EIA projections as a comparison point, and I suspect some of the other audience members do as well. So there's a question here about how EIA considers, or I guess if EIA considers, if and how, information about energy trends or investments, and whether or not or how these play into future scenarios. So this isn't quite stated explicitly, but I suppose this is also, thinking about technologies that are, in R&D today, but seem promising for the future. Some of those might be things like, I don't know, solid state batteries or small modular nuclear reactors. That they are, I know EIA tries to stay away from, making up information about the future, but some of these technologies seem promising enough that they may be part of the game. And how does EIA handle that sort of perspective?
I mean, we are certainly keeping on top of what's going on, and what's in demonstration, where are things in the kind of the development pipeline, so to speak. But yeah, we limit how we include them within our modeling. One of the things that I think is interesting, uh, because it always comes back to, well, what is the data we have on these things? What is the cost data? Like if something is in R&D, how is this going to be implemented? We need information, or we need a semblance of like information to kind of include it in our modeling. And even like thinking about the quote shale revolution, which one of my colleagues used to refer to it as a 30-year overnight success story of because this is going on since the 80s, the experimenting between horizontal drilling, hydraulic fracturing, and then they finally got it to pop, so to speak. And a lot of people miss it. A lot of people leading up to the early 2000s missed it. Pretty much everybody. It was including the EIA, like not anticipating how swiftly production was going to take off. And that was something, if you think, I'm drawing the parallel to like very, very, very nascent technologies to this technological application for drilling, because that is something we had some level of awareness of, but it still was something that I think was so challenging to kind of to model. And one of the things I find most interesting, and I know I I mean, I think there's value. I think there's value in the analysis, and I think there's value in even in analysis that we didn't get right. And EIA actually produces a retrospective of our annual energy outlook, so you can see how our projections lined up with reality and how our realized outcomes and what could be driving those differences. But one of the things think is interesting with the shale production in particular is, okay, so folks missed that initial bump up in domestic production. But then everybody also seemed to miss that refinement, that the longer laterals. And so again, I'm drawing kind of the parallel to like nascent technology or emerging technology or really emerging trends to like, well, what can we say about them without the data or the information at hand? Even when we've had data and information, it's just technological revolutions are just, kind of just really hard to predict.
Yeah, right. And the fracking one, hydrofracking seems like a really challenging one. As you were talking about, hydrofracking and its effect on oil and gas production, I was also thinking of solar, which, everybody misforecasted the growth of solar as well, where at least with solar, right, you can apply a learning curve and, maybe the learning rate was higher than you thought it was, and that would explain the difference. But with hydrofracking, right, it's harder to probably um, map it off of a learning curve.
Yeah,
But
I think,
yeah,
even thinking of solar, and I know like, yeah, obviously there's utility solar installation, modeling that, and it is a cost. And we do have a high and low renewables cost case to show kind of like the range of or we have a low cost case. But one of the things I think is interesting with how we model solar is for rooftop solar, we actually model it using a contagion model because it's like you have to, with some of these things, you have to think kind of, NEMS is an economic model, right? And and some of these decisions that are driving adoption of technologies or newer technologies aren't necessarily economic. And so we modeled rooftop solar by the zip code, thinking that like you might be like, hey, my neighbor just what do they got going on there? I mean, maybe I should do that. Even if it didn't, at least economically, is the right move type of thing. So there's a lot to consider, I guess.
that's fun. You work with colleagues from the Centers for Disease Control to study solar adoption. That's fun. So there's a couple questions in here. People mentioning energy efficiency trends and asking if EIA monitors these trends and I would add my spin to it. And also, how do you monitor energy efficiency? Because unlike other technologies, that's actually a whole basket of different things, right? It has a different sort of meaning, whether you're talking about residential energy use or automobiles, the investment in this space is not homogeneous necessarily. And I guess you can model it as a continuous trend, but sometimes new technologies appear and just kind of make rather nonlinear effects. I'm thinking of like LED lighting
Yeah.
came in and suddenly lighting energy use drops 75% or more.
Yeah. Well, I would be afraid I wouldn't give our consumption modelers do them justice by wading too far into it. But I know this is something that they have a pretty detailed representation of within their modeling. One of the things that EIA also does in support of our modeling is we have tech assessments that we do where we have people, we'll have buildings assessments or miscellaneous electric load assessments going on in buildings and looking at the efficiency gains and different things amongst those different sources. But it is yet another challenge, but I know it's something that we are I'm blown away by pretty much everybody at EIA. I feel really lucky to work with among what I consider the best of the best in energy analysts and statisticians. And I know they have looked deeply into this issue, but unfortunately, I can't add much more.
Yeah, sure. Okay. So we have just a few minutes left. So let me ask you, I've been focusing down to more and more specific questions. So a few of these actually came from when you were giving your presentation. But people were asking about some specific data types, whether EIA collects it and how. And then, so for example, do you does EI? I'll give you all three of them, and you can tell me, and you can answer
Yeah.
them in bulk if you like. So there's a question about energy consumed during the production of energy. So presumably oil wells and refineries, the energy that they self-consume, or maybe pumping stations for pipelines. A second one is about energy transmission. So I presume that means both pipelines and transmission system information. And then a question about covering U.S. territories, Puerto Rico or other territories, if that's included in EIA's data collection.
So we do have, and it's they're li energy is listed in the industrial sector. We do have data on, collection of information used within energy production or refining or LNG, liquefaction. And we also have information that we publish on losses of transmission in terms of electricity or fuel used in pipelines, which I know in the AEO we count that as transportation. So somewhat confusingly, but we do capture that somewhat significant part of our energy consumption. We don't have any, as far as I know, I don't believe we have any data collection in the territories. I know that that's something that we've considered, but I don't believe we have anything in the field down there right now.
Awesome. Great. Well, I'm being told that we're right at time, and well, also the clock tells me that. So I want to thank you, Deputy Administrator Angelina LaRose, for giving us a great presentation and also conversation. And I will give a brief plug. So because of the importance of this topic, EIA being so foundational to a lot of what we do as energy economists, we made this an open presentation for everyone, but I would also like to plug joining USAEE as a member. There's a lot of benefits. We have regular webinars that you won't hear about unless you're a USAEE member, because they're members only, and that we have journals, newsletters, discounts on the conferences, as well as you can get a directory of all of the members of USAEE and find your colleagues or other interested people around the US. And I also can give a quick webinar plug for our April webinar next month. Greg Upton from the LSU Center for Energy Studies is going to be talking about LNG markets, presumably among other things. And I've heard that we're trying to also organize a webinar at the last minute about the effects of the situation in Iran on energy prices, both globally and in the US. But you won't hear about all of those things unless you're a USAE member. But thank you for joining us, and we hope to see you next time.